The thing about the Appalachian Mountains is that they're old. I mean really old. We're talking about 480 million years of secrets pressed into those ridges and hollows, and sometimes those secrets don't want to stay buried. I'm telling you this story because it matters. Because what happened in the fall of 1960 in a forgotten corner of West Virginia changed how we understand the things that live in those mountains. And because the people who were there deserve to have their truth told, even if it sounds impossible. My name's irrelevant to this story, but what is relevant is that I spent 15 years collecting folklore and first-hand accounts from Appalachian communities. What started as academic research became something else entirely when I met Virgil in 2003. He was 81 years old, living in a nursing home in Charleston, and he'd kept quiet about what happened for 43 years. He only agreed to talk because he was dying and wanted someone to know that he wasn't crazy. That none of them were crazy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to October 1960, to a place called Stillwater Hollow. The hollow doesn't exist on maps anymore. You won't find it on Google Earth or in any official records after 1962. That should tell you something right there. But in 1960, it was home to maybe 40 people, spread across a dozen families who'd been living in those hills since before West Virginia was even a state. Coal mining families mostly. Hard people living hard lives. Virgil was 21 that fall, working as a deputy under Sheriff Tom Brentwood. It was a nothing job in a nothing place. His main duties involved breaking up fights at the company store and occasionally hauling in somebody's still. The most exciting thing that had happened all year was when the Henderson's bull got loose and destroyed Mrs. Patterson's vegetable garden. That all changed on October 17th. It started with the livestock. Now, you have to understand something about Appalachian communities in 1960. These people lived close to the land. They noticed things. When animals started acting strange, they paid attention. And in the first week of October, the animals went from strange to downright terrified. Chickens stopped laying, dogs refused to go outside after dark, horses would rear and scream at nothing. But the deer were the weirdest part. Hunters reported that the deer population had just vanished. Not migrated, not thinned out, vanished. In an area where you could usually spot a dozen whitetails on any given evening, there was nothing. It was like they knew something we didn't, Virgil told me, his hands shaking slightly as he remembered, like they'd picked up and left because something worse had moved in. On October 17th, just after dawn, a miner named Pete Dawson stumbled into the sheriff's office. Virgil said the man looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He was pale, sweating despite the cool morning air, and he couldn't stop his hands from trembling. "There's something wrong in the woods," Pete said. "Something real wrong." Sheriff Brentwood wasn't the type to spook easy. He'd served in World War II, had seen things in France that he never talked about. But Virgil said something in Pete's voice made even the sheriff pause. Pete had been running his trap line that morning up in the hills above his property. The traps had been destroyed, not sprung or broken, destroyed, twisted metal, wooden frames splintered like toothpicks. And there were tracks. They looked like deer tracks, Pete said, but wrong, all wrong. Brentwood and Virgil drove up to Pete's trap line that same morning. I've seen the photographs. Virgil kept them all these years, hidden in a shoebox under his bed. The trapline destruction was extensive. These weren't cheap wire snares. Pete used heavy-duty steel traps, the kind that could hold a bear. They'd been ripped apart with what must have been incredible force, but the tracks were what got to Virgil. "I'd been hunting these woods since I was 6 years old," he said. "I knew every animal track like I knew my own name." These were deer tracks. The right size, the right shape, that split hoof print. But the spacing was wrong. The gait was wrong. Deer walk a certain way. These tracks were too deliberate, too purposeful, like whatever made them was thinking about each step. They followed the tracks for about 200 yards before they just stopped. Not at a stream or rocky ground where tracks might disappear naturally. They just ended in the middle of a clearing. Like whatever made them had simply ceased to exist, or started to fly, or something else that Virgil didn't want to think about. The sheriff marked it down as vandalism and told Pete he'd keep an eye out. But Virgil could tell Brentwood was rattled. They didn't talk much on the drive back to town. 3 days later, Sarah Kettleman saw it. Sarah was 16, the daughter of the local Baptist preacher. By all accounts, she was a practical girl, not given to flights of fancy. She was walking home from her friend's house around dusk when she saw what she thought was a deer standing in the middle of the road. She told her father she'd stopped to look at it because something felt off. The deer wasn't moving. It was just standing there, broadside to her, maybe 40 feet away, close enough to see clearly in the fading light. It looked like a deer, Sarah would later testify. It had a deer's body, a deer's color, those white spots on the back. But Daddy, it was looking at me. And deer don't look at you like that. When her father pressed her on what she meant, Sarah struggled to explain. The deer's neck, she said, was bent at an angle that wasn't quite right. Its head was turned too far toward her, and its eyes. She kept coming back to the eyes. They weren't on the sides of its head like they should be, she said. They were more forward, like a person's eyes, like it needed to see straight ahead to watch me better. The deer, if that's what it was, had stared at her for what felt like minutes. Then, without warning, it had turned and walked into the woods. But it didn't walk like a deer. It walked with a strange, loping gait that Sarah described as wrong, like it was pretending to be a deer but didn't quite remember how deer are supposed to move. Preacher Kettleman brought Sarah to the sheriff's office the next morning. Brentwood listened patiently and wrote everything down, but Virgil could see the concern in his boss's eyes. This was the second strange report in less than a week. That night, the Hendersons' dog disappeared. Now, this wasn't just any dog. This was Duke, a 120-pound mastiff who'd once fought off a black bear that had gotten into the Hendersons' chicken coop. Duke didn't run from anything, but when Ray Henderson went to call him in that night, the dog was gone. They found his chain snapped, not unclipped, snapped, and drag marks leading into the woods. Ray Henderson organized a search party the next morning. Virgil and the sheriff joined about 15 men from town, all armed, all experienced hunters. They followed the drag marks up into the hills, into an area locals called the Twisted Pine Grove because of the way the trees grew there, all gnarled and bent like arthritic fingers. They found Duke about a mile in. I'm going to be straight with you about what they found because I think the details matter. Duke's body was lodged in a tree, not at the base of the tree. In the tree, wedged into a fork about 15 feet off the ground. The dog's neck was broken, his body cold and stiff. There's no way a deer did that, Ray Henderson said, his voice hollow. No way in hell. But around the tree, in the soft earth, were dozens of deer tracks, only deer tracks. The tracks circled the tree like something had been pacing around it, over and over, admiring its work. That's when Virgil noticed something that made his blood run cold. Pressed into the bark of the tree, right next to where the dog's body was wedged, was a hoof print, 15 feet off the ground. As if whatever left it had been standing upright, like a man, when it placed the dog's body in the tree. The search party returned to town in silence. Nobody wanted to say out loud what they were all thinking. That this wasn't a normal predator. That this wasn't anything natural at all. Sheriff Brentwood called a town meeting that night. The Stillwater Hollow Community Center was packed. Every family had sent someone. Virgil stood at the back of the room, watching the fear ripple through the crowd as Brentwood laid out the facts. The destroyed traps, Sarah's sighting, the dog in the tree. I'm not saying I know what's going on, Brentwood said, but I am saying we need to be careful. Nobody goes into the woods alone. Nobody goes out after dark. We keep the children close, and we keep our eyes open. A miner named Jack Stills stood up. Tom, you've been dancing around it, but we all know what we're dealing with here. There's something in those woods that ain't right, something that's playing with us. We don't know that, Brentwood started, but Jack cut him off. My grandfather told me stories, Jack said. Stories about things in these mountains that look like one thing, but are something else. Things that mimic, things that wear the wrong skin. An older woman in the front row crossed herself. Others shifted uncomfortably. This was 1960, remember. These were coal miners and farmers, practical people living in the modern age. But the Appalachian Mountains have a long memory, and so do the families that live there. The old stories never quite die, no matter how many electric lights you string up. We're not dealing with folklore, Brentwood said firmly. "We're dealing with a dangerous animal. Could be a bear, could be a mountain lion, could be something injured and acting strange, but it's an animal, and animals can be hunted." He was trying to calm them down, to give them something concrete to hold on to, but Virgil could hear the doubt in his voice. The meeting broke up around 10 p.m. Families hurried home, staying in groups, casting nervous glances at the tree line. Virgil offered to do a patrol of the town before turning in, and Brentwood agreed. It was just past midnight when Virgil saw it. He was driving slowly down the main road, checking that all the houses were locked up tight, when his headlights caught something standing at the edge of the woods. A deer. A perfectly normal-looking white-tailed doe, standing motionless at the tree line. Virgil slowed the patrol car to a stop, watching the deer. It didn't run, didn't even seem startled by the headlights. It just stood there, its body angled away from him, but its head turned in his direction, watching him. "I knew right then it was wrong," Virgil told me, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Deer don't stand like that. They don't watch cars like that. They spook, or they ignore you, or they freeze and then bolt. This thing was studying me." He reached for the rifle mounted in his patrol car, never taking his eyes off the deer. As his fingers closed around the stock, the deer took a step toward the road. Then another. Its movements were smooth, but somehow off rhythm, like a film played at the wrong speed. Virgil raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel. In the crosshairs, he could see the deer more clearly. It looked perfect. Every detail was right: the brown coat, the white tail, the delicate legs. But those eyes, even from 50 yards away, even in the darkness, there was something wrong about those eyes. The deer opened its mouth. "They don't do that," Virgil said. "Deer don't open their mouths like that, not unless they're eating or panting. This thing opened its mouth wide, wider than it should have been able to, and I swear to God, I swear on my mother's grave, it smiled at me." His finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the deer turned and walked into the woods, not with the bounding, alert gait of a spooked whitetail. It walked slowly, deliberately, like it knew he wouldn't shoot, like it was dismissing him. Virgil sat in the patrol car for 20 minutes, rifle ready, waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't, but he could feel it out there, in the darkness between the trees, watching him. He didn't sleep that night. The attacks started 48 hours later. The Wilcox family lived in a cabin about 2 miles outside of town. Ed Wilcox worked in the mines, and his wife Mary kept house and tended their small farm. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ages 6 to 12. On the night of October 23rd, something tried to get into their cabin. Ed heard it first, around 2 in the morning. Footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate footsteps that made the boards creak. He got out of bed, grabbed the shotgun he kept by the door, and listened. The footsteps moved across the porch to the front window. Then came the scratching. Not like a branch in the wind. Not like an animal pawing at wood. A deliberate scratch, like something running its nails down the window pane in a slow, measured rhythm. Ed moved to the window and looked out. There, standing on its hind legs with its front hooves pressed against the glass, was a deer. A full-grown buck with an impressive rack of antlers. It was standing upright like a man, its face inches from the window, looking in. Looking directly at Ed. "I could see my reflection in its eyes," Ed later reported, "could see myself standing there with the shotgun. And I knew in my bones that it could see me too, that it was measuring me." Ed raised the shotgun and fired through the window. The blast shattered the glass and hit the deer square in the chest. It staggered backward, let out a sound that Ed described as wrong, like a deer's bleat mixed with something else, something that could have been a laugh, and then dropped to all fours and ran into the woods. When dawn came, Ed went outside to check for a blood trail. He found the shattered window, the shotgun pellets embedded in the porch wood, but no blood. No hair, no sign that he'd hit anything at all, except a set of deer tracks that led from the porch into the woods. Except the tracks showed that the deer had approached the cabin on 2 legs, stood at the window on 2 legs, and only dropped to all fours after being shot. Ed Wilcox brought his family into town that morning and refused to return to the cabin. "I've hunted deer my whole life," he told Sheriff Brentwood. "That wasn't a deer. I don't know what the hell it was, but it wasn't a deer." That same night, 3 more families reported similar incidents, something standing on their porches, looking in their windows, scratching at their doors. Always at night, always watching, always deer, or things that looked like deer. The town was terrified. Brentwood called the state police. They sent 2 troopers who listened politely to the reports, looked at the tracks, and suggested it might be an unusually aggressive buck in rut, driven mad by disease or injury. They promised to send wildlife officers to investigate. The wildlife officers never came. What did come was media attention. Someone, Virgil never found out who, contacted a reporter from the Charleston Gazette. The reporter, a young guy named Dennis Wright, showed up in Stillwater Hollow on October 26th, looking for a story about strange animal attacks in rural West Virginia. He got more than he bargained for. Virgil took Dennis around to interview witnesses: Sarah Kettleman, Ed Wilcox, the Henderson family, Pete Dawson. Dennis listened to their stories with increasing skepticism that turned to unease. These weren't hysterical people. They were salt-of-the-earth Appalachian folks, and they were genuinely terrified. "What do you think it is?" Dennis asked Virgil as they sat in the diner that evening. "Honestly, I don't know, but I know it's not natural. I know these woods, and I know the animals in them. This is something else." Dennis wanted to see for himself. Against Virgil's strong advice, he announced his intention to spend the night in the woods with his camera, hoping to get photographic evidence. "You're going to get yourself killed," Virgil told him. "If there's really something out there, the world needs to know," Dennis replied. "And if there's not, then this is a mass hysteria story, and the world needs to know that too." There was no talking him out of it, so Virgil, against his better judgment, agreed to go with him. Sheriff Brentwood assigned 2 other deputies to join them, a guy named Carl Foster and an older man named Bill Yates. 4 armed men, all experienced outdoorsmen, all carrying rifles and flashlights. They'd hike up to the Twisted Pine Grove, where most of the activity seemed centered, and spend the night observing. They set out at dusk on October 27th. The woods were silent. That was the first thing Virgil noticed. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals, no wind through the branches. Just a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to muffle even their footsteps. They reached the Twisted Pine Grove around 8 p.m. and set up camp in a small clearing. Dennis prepared his camera equipment while the 3 lawmen established a watch rotation. The plan was simple: 2 men on watch at all times, rotating every 2 hours. Nothing happened for the first 3 hours. Just silence and darkness, and the weak circle of light from their campfire. Then at 11 p.m., they heard it. Movement in the woods. The soft sound of hooves on dead leaves, circling the camp, staying just beyond the firelight. Not one animal, multiple animals, moving in coordination. "Deer," Dennis whispered, reaching for his camera. "Maybe," Virgil said, but his hands were tight on his rifle. "Don't make any sudden moves." They sat in tense silence, listening to the footsteps circle them, around and around, maintaining a constant distance. Virgil counted at least 6 distinct sets of tracks, maybe more. Then the circling stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. Then from the darkness directly ahead of them came the sound of something large moving through the undergrowth, coming toward the camp. It stepped into the firelight. A deer. A doe, average-sized, completely normal in every visible way. It stood at the edge of their camp, maybe 20 feet away, and looked at them. "Jesus," Carl whispered. "Look at its eyes." In the firelight, the deer's eyes reflected wrong, not the typical green or yellow eyeshine you'd expect from a whitetail. These eyes reflected red, like burning coals, and they were positioned slightly too forward on the skull. Dennis raised his camera and snapped a photograph. The flash made all of them flinch, but the deer didn't even blink. It just stood there, staring as Dennis advanced the film and took another shot. "This is incredible," Dennis breathed. "This is—" The deer opened its mouth, its jaw unhinged like a snake's, dropping far lower than any deer's jaw should be able to extend. From somewhere deep in its throat came a sound, a wet, rattling vocalization that started as a deer's bleat, but descended into something else, something that sounded almost like words. "Not right." That's what Virgil heard. That's what he swears to this day he heard. 2 words, malformed and broken, coming from the deer's distended mouth. Bill Yates fired his rifle. The shot caught the deer in the shoulder, a clean hit at that range. The deer staggered, and a spray of something dark splattered the leaves. But instead of falling, the deer let out a shriek, high-pitched and furious, and charged. It covered 20 feet in seconds, moving with a speed that seemed impossible. Carl fired, then Virgil fired, both shots hitting center mass. The deer crashed into their camp, scattering equipment, its hooves slashing at anything in reach. Dennis screamed as a hoof caught his camera, smashing it to pieces. Bill swung his rifle like a club, connecting with the deer's head with a sickening crack. The deer stumbled, finally going down. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy breathing and Bill chambering another round. Then, from the darkness around them, came answering calls. That same shrieking sound coming from multiple directions. The other deer, the ones that had been circling, responding to their fallen companion. "Run," Virgil said. "Run right now." They ran. 4 grown men crashed through the twisted pine grove in blind panic, branches whipping their faces, the sounds of pursuit crashing through the woods behind them. Virgil could hear hooves, many hooves, and those terrible vocalizations that sounded almost human, almost like words. Carl went down first. Something hit him from the side, hard enough to knock him off his feet. Bill turned to help him, raising his rifle, and Virgil saw it in the moonlight, a buck, massive, with a rack of antlers that seemed too large, too numerous. It was standing on its hind legs, towering over Carl's prone form. Bill fired. The buck's head snapped back, and it dropped to all fours. But 2 more deer emerged from the shadows, flanking them, and Virgil realized with cold horror that they were being hunted. Herded. "The road," Dennis shouted. "Get to the road." They pulled Carl to his feet. He was bleeding from a gash on his head but mobile, and ran. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. Virgil could hear them breathing, could hear the terrible sounds they made as they communicated with each other. Because that's what it was. Communication. Coordination. These things were working together, cutting off escape routes, driving them in a specific direction. They burst out of the tree line onto the main road just as a pair of headlights appeared around the bend, Sheriff Brentwood's patrol car. He must have gotten worried when they didn't check in and come looking for them. The car screeched to a halt, and Brentwood jumped out, shotgun in hand. "Get in the car, now!" They piled into the vehicle, Virgil taking one last look at the tree line. He could see them there, at the edge of the woods, at least a dozen deer standing in a line, watching, some on all fours, some standing upright, all of them with those forward-facing, red-reflecting eyes. As Brentwood floored the accelerator and the patrol car sped away, Virgil saw one of the deer, the big buck, lift its head and make that sound again. That almost word sound. "Leave!" That's what it sounded like, a warning, a command. They drove straight through the night to Charleston, not stopping until they reached the state police headquarters. Virgil, still shaking, still bleeding from cuts and scrapes, gave his report to a skeptical sergeant who clearly thought they'd all lost their minds. Carl needed stitches for the gash on his head. Dennis had a sprained ankle and kept muttering about his destroyed camera, the lost photographs that would have proved everything. Bill Yates sat in silence, his rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. "We need to go back," Dennis said. "We need better equipment, more men, more cameras. We need to document this." "Like hell we do," Bill said quietly. "Those things wanted us gone. We should stay gone." But Dennis was insistent. He contacted the newspaper, contacted wildlife officials, even reached out to a professor at the university who studied animal behavior. He wanted to mount a proper expedition to prove that something unknown was living in those woods. He got his expedition, but not the way he'd hoped. On November 2nd, a team arrived in Stillwater Hollow, federal agents, not wildlife officers, men in suits with serious faces and no-nonsense attitudes. They went through the town asking questions, confiscating reports, and making it very clear that people should stop talking about what they'd seen. "National security," one of them told Sheriff Brentwood. "This area is near sensitive installations. Mass hysteria can cause problems. We need you to help us calm things down." What sensitive installations they were referring to was never made clear, but their message was received. Stop talking, stop making reports, forget what you saw. Dennis Wright tried to publish his story anyway. The Charleston Gazette killed it. When he approached other papers, he was turned down repeatedly. No one wanted to touch it. When he pressed the issue, he lost his job. Last Virgil heard, Dennis had moved out west somewhere, gave up journalism entirely. The federal agents set up a perimeter around the Twisted Pine Grove and conducted their own investigation. What they found, if they found anything, was never shared with the local authorities. After 2 weeks, they packed up and left. But before they left, they did something strange. They brought in construction crews and built a fence. A tall chain-link fence with barbed wire on top, surrounding about 5 square miles of forest centered on the Twisted Pine Grove. Posted signs every 100 feet. Government property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. And just like that, part of the mountain was gone, locked away, off limits. The sightings stopped after that. The animals returned to normal. The deer came back to the area. Regular deer, normal deer, that behaved exactly as deer should behave. Life in Stillwater Hollow returned to a tense sort of normalcy. But people didn't forget. They couldn't forget. Families started moving away. Slowly at first, then in a steady trickle. By 1962, Stillwater Hollow was a ghost town. The coal mine closed. The company store shut down. The houses were abandoned, left to rot in the mountain weather. The place was effectively erased. Virgil moved to Charleston and tried to forget. He got married, had kids, lived a normal life. But he never went hunting again, never went camping, never went back to those mountains. People ask me why I moved to the city, he told me. I tell them I wanted better opportunities, better schools for my kids. That's what I tell them. But the truth, I couldn't stand being near those woods anymore. Couldn't stand the thought that those things were still out there, behind that fence, doing whatever it is they do. After Virgil told me his story, I did my own research. I wanted to find corroboration, official records, anything that could confirm or deny what happened. What I found was disturbing in its absence. There are no official records of Stillwater Hollow after 1961. The town doesn't appear on any census data, any tax records, any government documents. It's like it was scrubbed from existence. I found references to a wildlife containment area established in Randolph County in late 1960, but no details about what was being contained or why. The area remains restricted to this day, though the official reason given is environmental sensitivity. I tracked down 3 other survivors from Stillwater Hollow. 2 refused to talk to me. The third, an elderly woman named Beth Parsons, would only say this: "We saw something we weren't meant to see. Something old, something that's been in those hills longer than people have. And the government decided it was better to bury the whole thing than admit they don't know what it is." Carl Foster died in 1987 of a heart attack. Bill Yates passed in 1995, Sheriff Brentwood lasted until 2001, and according to his daughter, he never spoke about the fall of 1960, not even to family. Dennis Wright, the reporter, I finally tracked down in Oregon. He's in his 70s now, running a small bookstore. When I called him and mentioned Stillwater Hollow, there was a long silence on the line. "I've spent 50 years trying to forget that place," he finally said, "trying to convince myself it was a hoax or mass hysteria, or that I'd misremembered the whole thing. But I didn't. It was real. All of it was real. And the scariest part, I think the government knew. I think they'd known about those things for years, maybe decades. We just stumbled into an area where they couldn't hide it anymore." He wouldn't say more than that, wouldn't meet with me. Just advised me to drop the whole thing and let sleeping dogs lie. But here's what keeps me up at night. Here's the part that terrifies me more than the story itself. The Appalachian Mountains stretch for over 1,500 miles from Alabama to Canada. They're some of the oldest mountains on Earth, worn down by time, covered in dense forest, full of places where humans rarely go. Places with no cell service, no roads, no witnesses. If something like this could happen in Stillwater Hollow, if something like those not-deer could exist in one forgotten corner of West Virginia, what else is out there? What other old things are living in those mountains, in the deep hollows and high ridges where nobody goes? And more importantly, why did the government work so hard to cover it up? I filed a Freedom of Information Act request about the Stillwater Hollow incident. It was denied. I tried to visit the fenced-off area. You can get close enough to see the fence from certain hiking trails. It's still there, still maintained, the signs still warn of prosecution for trespassing. Whatever's in there, somebody still wants it contained. Virgil died in 2004, a year after our interview. He made me promise something before he passed. He made me promise that I'd tell this story, that I'd document what happened so that people would know, so that if someone else encountered something like this, they'd have a frame of reference. They'd know they weren't crazy. So here's what I learned from investigating this case, and here's what I think you should know. First, the phenomenon of Not-Deer isn't unique to Stillwater Hollow. I've found scattered reports throughout Appalachian folklore going back centuries. Native American stories talk about shapeshifters that wear deer skins but aren't deer. Early European settlers reported devil deer that walked on hind legs and spoke in tongues. There's a consistency to these accounts that's hard to dismiss. The scientific explanation, if there is one, remains elusive. Some cryptozoologists suggest an unknown species, something that evolved to mimic prey animals for hunting purposes. But that doesn't explain the intelligence, the apparent malevolence, or the government's interest. The paranormal explanation is even less satisfying. Are these entities, spirits, something from another dimension? These are questions that science can't currently answer and that folklore can only hint at. What I can tell you with certainty is that the people of Stillwater Hollow saw something real. The physical evidence, the destroyed traps, the dead dog, the bullet-riddled clearing where they fought the Not-Deer, all of it existed before the government sealed the area. The trauma experienced by the witnesses was genuine and lasting. Second, there's the government response. The speed with which federal agents arrived, the thoroughness with which they suppressed information, the construction of a permanent containment fence. This all suggests prior knowledge. This wasn't the response to an unknown phenomenon. This was a protocol, a procedure they'd followed before. Which raises the question, how many other Stillwater Hollows have there been? How many other communities have seen something they shouldn't have, only to be silenced and erased? The federal government has a documented history of strange cover-ups, Project Blue Book, the Tuskegee experiments, MK Ultra. Is there a Project Not-Deer we don't know about? Third, and this is important from an educational standpoint, we need to reconsider our relationship with wilderness areas and our assumptions about what lives there. The modern scientific worldview suggests that we've catalogued and understood most of Earth's megafauna, that there are no more mysteries, no more unknown large animals left to discover. But the Earth is bigger than we think, and wilderness areas are wilder than we imagine. Every year, new species are discovered. Every year, animals thought extinct are found alive. The ocean's depths remain largely unexplored, and the same is true for the deepest parts of old-growth forests. The Appalachian Mountains, specifically, are a biodiversity hotspot. They're home to more species of salamander than anywhere else on Earth. They contain plants found nowhere else. Why couldn't they contain something else too? Something we haven't classified yet. Fourth, there's a cultural component to this that we can't ignore. Appalachian communities have been dismissed and ridiculed for generations. Their folklore is treated as quaint superstition, their experiences marginalized, their knowledge devalued. When people from Stillwater Hollow reported what they saw, they were met with skepticism and mockery. Despite being experienced hunters and outdoorsmen who knew the local wildlife better than any visiting expert. This pattern repeats across marginalized communities. When indigenous people report strange phenomena, when rural populations describe unusual encounters, they're often dismissed out of hand. But these communities have lived on the land for generations. They notice things. They know when something is wrong. We need to listen more and assume less. Fifth, and this is purely my opinion based on years of researching this case, I think what happened in Stillwater Hollow was a territorial conflict. I think those Not-Deer had lived in that area for a long time, probably centuries, in the deep woods where people rarely went. And when the coal mining increased, when human activity expanded into their territory, they reacted. The attacks weren't random. They were escalating warnings. The destroyed traps, a message. The dog in the tree, intimidation. The window scratching, a demonstration of power. They were saying in their way, "Leave, this is our place." And when people didn't leave quickly enough, the attacks became more aggressive, more direct. They were driving humans out, establishing dominance. The government's response, fencing off the area, making it permanently off-limits, might have been the only solution that worked for both species. Give the not-deer their territory back, keep humans out, problem solved. But here's what bothers me. The fence doesn't contain the entire Appalachian range. It only contains 5 square miles. 5 square miles out of 1,500 miles of mountain range. If the not-deer existed in Stillwater Hollow, do they exist in other isolated pockets? Are there other fenced-off areas we don't know about? I've spent the last 15 years looking for patterns, for other towns that disappeared, for other government containment areas in Appalachian regions. I've found enough to suggest that Stillwater Hollow wasn't unique, but not enough to prove a broader pattern. But the implications are staggering. Let's talk about what the not-deer actually are, based on the consistent descriptions from witnesses. They appear to be a form of mimic. They look like deer down to very specific details, the coloring, the size, the hoofprints. But the mimicry is imperfect. The eyes are wrong, the gait is wrong, the behavior is wrong. This suggests intelligence. Natural mimicry, like in insects or fish, is instinctual and usually perfect. But the not-deer's mimicry is learned, adaptive, and imperfect, which paradoxically makes it more sophisticated. They're not born looking exactly like deer. They're actively trying to look like deer, which implies conscious effort and understanding. The vocalizations are even more disturbing. Multiple witnesses reported sounds that resembled human speech. Not clear speech, not intelligible sentences, but approximations. Like someone who'd heard human language, but didn't quite understand how to reproduce it. This suggests they've been listening to humans, studying us the way we study them. And the coordinated hunting behavior? That's pack intelligence. Wolves hunt in packs, but their coordination is instinctual. The not-deer's coordination seemed strategic, adaptive, almost tactical. They cut off escape routes. They flanked their targets. They communicated during the hunt. Whatever these things are, they're intelligent. Maybe not human-level intelligent, but far more intelligent than any known deer species. More intelligent than most predators. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If they're that intelligent, what do they think of us? What have they observed about human behavior over the years they've been watching from the woods? Now, I want to address the skeptics, because I know what you're thinking. Mass hysteria, misidentification, people seeing what they expect to see, feeding off each other's fear, turning ordinary animals into monsters. I've considered that explanation extensively. And it doesn't hold up. Mass hysteria doesn't create physical evidence. It doesn't destroy steel traps or place dead dogs in trees. It doesn't leave tracks that professional trackers find anomalous. It doesn't prompt the federal government to fence off 5 square miles and classify the whole incident. Misidentification doesn't explain the consistency of the reports. These weren't vague descriptions of something weird. These were specific, detailed accounts from experienced outdoorsmen, all describing the same anatomical abnormalities, the same behavioral patterns, the same wrongness. And here's the thing about Appalachian people. They're not prone to flights of fancy. These are practical folks. They hunt, they fish, they live close to the land. They know the difference between a deer acting strange because it's sick or injured, and something that's fundamentally not a deer at all. Could some of the reports have been exaggerated by fear? Absolutely. When you're terrified, running through dark woods with something chasing you, your perception isn't perfectly reliable. But the core observations, the forward-facing eyes, the bipedal stance, the wrong gait, the vocalizations, these were reported independently by multiple witnesses before anyone started comparing stories. That's not mass hysteria. That's corroboration. I also want to talk about the cover-up, because that's where this story gets really dark. The federal government's response to Stillwater Hollow follows a pattern we've seen in other cases. When something happens that challenges the accepted scientific paradigm, when something threatens public order or raises uncomfortable questions, the response is containment, suppression, and denial. But why? If the not-deer are real, If they're an unknown species, why not study them openly? Why not bring in scientists, document them properly, understand what they are? I have a theory, and it's not a comforting one. I think the government did study them. I think the federal agents who came to Stillwater Hollow knew exactly what they were dealing with because they'd dealt with it before, and I think what they found was so disturbing, so dangerous, or so incomprehensible that they decided the only viable option was to lock it away and pretend it doesn't exist. Because here's what the Not-Deer represent: a fundamental challenge to our understanding of reality. We think we know what lives in North America. We think we've catalogued all the large animals, understood all the ecosystems, mapped all the mysteries. We think nature is knowable, controllable, safe if you just follow the rules. The Not-Deer say otherwise. They say there are still things in the woods we don't understand, things that don't fit our categories, that challenge our assumptions, that resist our attempts to study and classify them. And if that's true in the Appalachian Mountains, where else might it be true? What else are we missing? What else has been hidden? These are questions that threaten the entire structure of scientific authority. They threaten the comforting narrative that we as a species are in control, that we understand the world we live in. So it's easier to deny, easier to fence off the area, silence the witnesses, and pretend it never happened. But it did happen, and the fence is still there. I visited the area around Stillwater Hollow last year. The town itself is gone, the buildings have collapsed, the roads are overgrown, nature has reclaimed everything. You wouldn't know people ever lived there unless you knew what to look for. But the fence is maintained, fresh paint on the signs, no rust on the chain link, security cameras at intervals. Someone is still watching that area, still keeping people out, still maintaining the containment, which means whatever's in there is still in there. I hiked as close to the fence as I legally could and stood there for an hour watching the woods beyond. It looked normal, peaceful, trees, undergrowth, the distant sound of a stream, normal Appalachian forest. But I felt watched. I felt the same thing Virgil described, that sense of something observing from the shadows, something intelligent and patient and utterly other. I didn't see any Not-Deer. I didn't hear any strange vocalizations. But the absence of normal deer was notable, the absence of birdsong, the silence that seemed just a little too heavy. I left before dark. I'm not ashamed to admit that. So what's the takeaway here? What should you, the reader, learn from the Stillwater Hollow incident? First, believe people when they report strange encounters, especially if they're from communities with traditional knowledge of the land. Don't dismiss them as ignorant or superstitious. They've seen something. Maybe not what they think they saw, but something. Second, understand that nature is not fully known. Science is a process, not a finished product. We're constantly discovering new species, new behaviors, new phenomena. The map is not the territory, and there are still blank spaces on the map. Third, be cautious in wild areas. Follow your instincts. If something feels wrong, if an animal is behaving strangely, if you get that primitive feeling that you're being watched or hunted, trust it. Millions of years of evolution gave you those instincts for a reason. Fourth, ask questions about government secrecy. Demand transparency. The Stillwater Hollow cover-up happened because people were willing to accept non-answers, to drop their inquiries when official channels shut them down. We need to be more persistent, more demanding of accountability. And fifth, respect the mystery. Not everything needs to be caught, killed, and mounted on a wall. Not everything needs to be fully understood and catalogued. Sometimes it's enough to know that something exists, to acknowledge its reality, and to give it space. The Not-Deer of Stillwater Hollow wanted to be left alone. They wanted their territory back. The government gave it to them in the most permanent way possible. Maybe that's the right outcome. Maybe some things should remain behind fences, in the deep woods, in the spaces we don't go. But we should know they're there. We should acknowledge them. We should stop pretending that the world is completely mapped and measured and understood. Because it's not. And in the old mountains, in the deep hollows, in the forgotten places, things still live that we've never named. Things that don't want to be found. Things that watch us from the shadows with forward-facing eyes and an intelligence we can barely comprehend. Virgil Mackley's final words to me, recorded on a crackly cassette tape that I've listened to 100 times, were these. People think the wilderness is empty. They think they're the top of the food chain, the only intelligent thing in the woods. But those mountains are older than our species, older than most species, and they've had a long time to evolve things we can't imagine. The Not-Deer were a wake-up call, a reminder that we're guests in those woods, not owners, and some of the other guests don't want us there. He paused, breathing heavily. His lungs were failing by then, and added, "I hope they stay behind that fence. I hope they never get out. But fences break, containment fails, and if those things ever decide to expand their territory again, if they ever come down from the mountains into the valleys where people live, God help us. God help us all." The cassette ends there with a click. I think about that warning a lot. I think about climate change pushing species into new territories, about human development encroaching further into wilderness, about the increasing overlap between human civilization and wild spaces. I think about how many unexplored pockets remain in the Appalachian Mountains, how many valleys where people never go, how many deep woods that haven't seen a human presence in decades, and I wonder what else is out there, what else is watching, what else is waiting. The 1960 Appalachian Not-Deer sighting changed everything because it revealed a truth we're not comfortable with. We don't actually know what shares this planet with us. We've assumed in our arrogance that we've found everything, named everything, understood everything. But in the old places, in the forgotten corners, in the deep and wild spaces, there are still mysteries, still unknowns, still things that don't fit our categories and don't care about our assumptions. The fence around Stillwater Hollow is a monument to that truth, a reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because we haven't tried to solve them, but because we've decided, wisely or not, that some things are better left alone. I don't know if we made the right choice. I don't know if containment will hold. I don't know what the future holds as climate and civilization continue to push into wild spaces. But I know this: Virgil wasn't crazy. The people of Stillwater Hollow weren't hysterical. They saw something real, something that challenged everything we think we know about the natural world. And that something is still out there, behind its fence, in the mountains where it's always been. Watching, waiting, remembering. The Not-Deer of 1960 were a warning. The question is, are we listening?